Okay, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I will start going through the panelist here. Give me just a second if I can make sure this works correctly. All right. So our first panelist is with our awarded vendor, Disaster Recovery Services, Dr. Kim Abrego. We've known Kim for a while. I guess our introduction to Kim happened in our lovely Hurricane Harvey recently in 2017. Kim has been in the disaster recovery business for a long time, since 2001. I think she was probably about 12 years old back then, maybe, Kim. But she's the president and COO of Disaster Recovery Services. And I'm just going to kind of read because this is a great description and tells the story. She and her team help public entities recover hundreds of millions of dollars from insurance and FEMA following adverse events. The adverse events obviously being hurricane, tornado, any of the unfortunate events. Since 2001, she's focused successfully positioning clients to be resilient following a disaster, enabling them to recover better and faster. This includes helping agencies learn how to prepare, respond, and recover. And I think one of the key words here is prepare. With Kim and then the next lady, Shelly, speaking, Kim used a term that I'm going to steal and use a lot in the future. She called it blue sky days. In other words, today it may not be raining or storming or wherever, doing whatever where you're located, but people like Kim, Shelly, and their company and people in this business help you prepare. So when these things do happen, you're better situated and you can respond, you can recover, maximize your FEMA dollars, and go down that road. I know there are people that don't even attempt the FEMA because they don't think there's anything there for them. I think reaching out and working with people like Kim, Shelly, and their company can help you think differently and maximize things to come back to your city or county, school district, university, wherever you might work. So let's go back from Kim. We're going to the next presenter is Shelly Vineyard. Shelly is a business development and marketing coordinator at Disaster Recovery Services, focusing on the public entity risk management and procurement strategies, facilitating complex disaster recovery projects. With 13 years experience, and I can attest for Shelly's experience, having been an executive director over the purchasing and warehouse functions of one of the larger school districts around here, and being thrown to the fire and being part of the largest amount of FEMA dollars that were expended on a school district for Hurricane Harvey a number of years ago. It's 3 years ago now. She's got tremendous experience in this area and also vast experience in the procurement area as far as understanding how you think on the other side, how the governmental entity procurement departments think, their wants, their needs, what will help them prepare better for these things coming up. And let's go to the third is Christy Nichols. She is our own Christy Nichols. She's with Choice Partners. Now, I know y'all can see from these three pictures why they put their pictures up and not mine. So anyway, Christy is the third of our panelists. She's a contract manager with us at Choice Partners, and we've got 5 full-time contract managers within our group, writing contracts, doing renewals, being the first point of contact for our vendors. Focuses on writing the technology contracts, oversees our online supply catalog, which probably a lot of you are very familiar with for our members, handles the RFPs for the 1,100 items that are available and that are on this online catalog. More than 15 years purchase experience. I believe she's worked for probably 3 different school districts, so she's kind of seen a number of different things, 3 different areas, either on the purchasing side, supervisory, and managerial side. She understands a lot about the wants and needs also, and has the hands-on experience of being in those positions So she comes from a great spot as far as knowing how to help and he assists in choice partners, the trade show exhibits, and networking. She does a lot of work outside of just writing the contracts for choice partners also. So I think with that being said, I'm going to hand the mouse over to Dr. Kim Abrego, and I'll be quiet. Go ahead, Kim.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank
Good morning, everybody. So diving into some of the content here, FEMA funding, FOMO, what could you be missing? We don't have to reach very far to get some tangible examples that make FEMA funding relevant to you and your organization, wherever you may be. So, currently in this unprecedented time in the midst of COVID, we have every state in the nation that has received a national or a disaster declaration for public assistance, making public entities and not-for-profits eligible to receive FEMA federal funding for emergency protective measures related to their response to COVID. In addition, we've just started hurricane season, and NOAA's projecting this to be one of the more active hurricane seasons. So we're anticipating there will be some FEMA funding associated with any named storms that make their way onto shore. So, a lot of potential to access FEMA funding, which can be very beneficial to your organization. To put it into scale for you, this chart here shows dollars spent from 1998 to 2018. So that's over a 20-year span. We're looking at $91.8 billion worth of FEMA funding. So that's funding that's gone out to public entities and not-for-profits following disasters. Of that $91.8 billion, 42% of that is categorized as emergency work. And so FEMA has what they call emergency work and permanent work. Emergency work is your temporary response to protect life, health, and safety following a disaster. And it's normally within the first 6 months following a disaster. So if you can do the math there, you're looking at almost $40 billion that have gone through agencies' hands in response to a disaster within 6 months' time. And if you think about what your typical procurement cycle looks like, from when your end users come and ask, for a purchase to when that actually happens, can you respond within that quick amount of time? And it's typically even shorter than that. So 30 to 60 days is where you see the biggest spike. And if you think about the volume of procurement or purchases following a disaster event, and then overlay that with additional FEMA requirements where you might not be used to working with federal dollars, and in addition, working with FEMA dollars, which have their own rules applied to them. So it's kind of like drinking from a fire hose. Oh, and by the way, you're in the middle of disaster, and so you might not, and like in this case, have access to your office, have access to your servers, have access to the people and the reporting approval requirements that you normally need. So there's an awful lot going on within that 42% or 40 billion. And then the 53% represents your permanent work. So this is, actual repairs, long-term repairs and rebuild in response to a disaster. And of that amount, 81% is really related to purchases. So you can see that there's a lot of money flowing through procurement. And so, with that being said, the FEMA Public Assistance Grant can really be one of the scariest grants that you work with. So it's a lot of money flowing very quickly. There's a lot of rules and regulations, and FEMA can come back later and deobligate funding. And so what that means is they can claw it back. To put the time frame into context, we are currently helping organizations still close out or work through their Hurricane Ike claims. And I know some of you might be outside of the state of Texas, so we live in the disaster world. That was 2008. that means that their audit window for those expenditures hasn't even started yet. So they have a 3-year audit window once that's finally closed out. So we're looking at 15 to 20 years post-disaster, where the OIG and or FEMA can come back and review those purchases. And if they find any sort of errors or missteps, can recommend that that funding be clawed back. So that makes this grant, while opportunistic, quite scary, especially when you're in the procurement world, because FEMA and the OIG came and did an audit of funding after Hurricane Katrina, and they found that of the majority of dollars that were being deobligated, the reasons behind those deobligations were procurement related. And that actually sparked them to create a department called the Procurement Disaster Assistance Team, or PDAT for short, within FEMA, to help provide guidance on procurement requirements associated with federal dollars to try and minimize that FEMA deobligation as a result of procurement missteps. In our minds, unfortunately, there's a bit of a sequencing issue there, and that a lot of that guidance comes post-event. So it's a little bit too little too late. And so, as Jeff mentioned, we're very passionate about helping agencies prepare for and address and learn about FEMA requirements ahead of disasters, so that you can take advantage of your blue sky days and really start preparing, analyzing your policies and procedures, putting things into place that can help protect you and make your organizations more resilient as you move forward. So with that, you do want to weigh the options. And so FEMA is a hassle. There are a lot of rules, there's a lot of regulations, there's a lot of requirements that sit outside of your standard procurement process, and they sit outside of the things that you're doing day in and day out. But what you want to weigh that against is, can you put your organization into a position where you can help maximize recovery, restore faster, and be more resilient? And you might think, well, geez, that's a lot to put on kind of the procurement department's shoulders. But unfortunately, a lot of these rules and regulations really sit with procurement and with purchasing. And so learning about it, understanding it, and taking even small steps that Shelly will go through when she's taking you through her slides and information can really put you guys on that right-hand side of the scale, where you're in a much better position should you encounter a disaster event. And so talking about procurement's roles, as much as you might think procurement isn't directly tied to a disaster, you really have an important role in calming fears within your organization and maximizing recovery. We're currently taking some higher education clients and some counties through their COVID recovery, and the procurement departments play an integral, critical role in setting those agencies up for success. So as we're working through all of the expenditures that took place, we're now working closely with those procurement folks to pull in all of the right documentation to support those expenditures, to support there was open competition, that the federal terms and conditions were included, all the things Shelly's going to walk you through, so that when we submit those packages to FEMA for reimbursement, FEMA goes, you know what, yes, this checks all the boxes, and we can now obligate funding to this agency. In addition, procurement is heavily involved in all of our recovery discussions. So they really do have a presence in coordinating and communicating between departments, and often they're the ones that have visibility across the board, across departments, into what is actually going on. And so they can come in and say, well, I've seen this over here and I'm not seeing in this department. Is that something that we should be paying attention to? So they also lend, or you can also lend, some visibility and help with communication in response to a disaster. So with that, I will turn it over to Shelly.
Thank you, Kim, and good morning, everyone. So we've already established why we might want to pursue FEMA funding. And, it really comes down to the fact that it's very difficult to defend to our constituents why we would leave significant funding on the table, even if it can be a challenge or be a hassle to meet the FEMA requirements. And, here's the tricky thing with FEMA funding. Typically, when you're expending federal funds, you know that ahead of time. You know that federal funds are your funding source. You've submitted for a federal grant or you're being sponsored by a federal program. And so, before you make those purchases that, okay, these are federal funds and we need to follow the federal rules. Well, with FEMA funding, a disaster happens. You start making purchases to respond to the event, to start to recover. You're using your pre-awarded contracts. You may be using your go-to cooperative contracts, or you may even be sole sourcing because it's an emergency. But most of those contracts really haven't been procured typically according to the federal guidelines. So then, we feel like, okay, we're stuck. I mean, right? There's nothing we can do. Well, maybe not. There are some things that we can do and to prepare a little bit ahead of time and be in a better position to align these purchases with the FEMA guidelines. And there are even some things that I think you could even go back today to better position your organization to meet FEMA's guidelines should you find yourself in need of FEMA reimbursement. So our goal over our time together is to build your confidence in understanding the major FEMA procurement and contracting rules and identify the things that you can do today to prepare your organization so you're not making mistakes in the early days of that disaster. Kim mentioned how many dollars are flowing out in the early days of disaster. You can prepare not to make those mistakes so that you're not jeopardizing your physical and financial recovery from a catastrophic event. So a good place for us to start is with an understanding of the federal procurement thresholds and what those thresholds mean to your organization as a non-federal entity. So here we have the current federal thresholds. Micro purchases are those purchases that are under $10,000. And from the federal perspective, there's no competition required at this level. The small purchase category are those purchases from $10,000 all the way up to $250,000 from the federal standpoint. And at that level, quotes are required from an adequate number of suppliers. And FEMA's definition of adequate is a minimum of 3. And so the federal simplified acquisition threshold currently is $250,000. And that then means that purchases at $250,000 and over are what we have labeled here as large purchases. Those require a formal, publicly competed and awarded purchase. So what do all those thresholds mean to you as a non-federal entity? Well, some of you that have joined the webinar today, you may potentially be defined for FEMA purposes under the FEMA Public Assistance Grant as a state entity. If you're a state entity, when it comes to competition, you're going to follow the same rules that you follow for non-federal funds at the state level. But for all the rest of you who are non-state entities, I mean, that would be your local governments, municipalities, special utility districts, public school districts, and even some eligible private nonprofits, you're going to be required to follow the most restrictive of federal versus state versus local when it comes to competition. And, oftentimes your state or local competitive thresholds are much lower than those federal thresholds that we outlined. And FEMA's going to look to you to follow those more restrictive policies and procedures. FEMA will have a copy of your local policy and procedures, and they're going to be checking that against those procurement packets that are sent through to make sure that you are indeed following the most restrictive of those rules. So now that we've established sort of a baseline for us as far as what those thresholds are, let's dive into some of the pitfalls that we want to help you avoid. Procurement missteps are by far the largest exposure to jeopardizing FEMA funding. And I often like to say that procurement is the low-hanging fruit when it comes to funding being deemed ineligible or from being clawed back years down the road. And because proper procurement is such a hot topic with FEMA, it's checked on the front end of the process nowadays. It used to be that most of that heavy check didn't come till the end of the process, but it's checked on the front end of the process now. FEMA has come up with their own top 10 procurement under grants mistakes, and they have a nice little roadmap visual here that captures them all in one place. And so we're going to be providing you after the webinar today. One of the resources is going to be a helpful links document, and that'll direct you to not only this particular visual, but a lot of other FEMA resources. So know that you'll have that. But we're going to take a dive into some of the details that are captured on this visual, some of these missteps, so that you can prepare and make adjustments to your existing processes prior to a catastrophic event taking place. And because proper procurement according to FEMA's rules is so important, it's really key that those of you responsible for procurement activity, that doesn't always mean that you're somebody in the formal purchasing department. You may be responsible for managing the procurement contracts and things like that at a department level in your organization. But it's really key for you all that are involved in procurement activity to be able to keep your disaster recovery team prepared and calm during your recovery response by exhibiting your confidence and understanding these FEMA rules and actions that you can take to avoid some very costly mistakes. So one of the areas that I really want to focus on for a while, and I'm going to park on this topic for a bit, because this is where I see applicants jeopardize a lot of their FEMA funding, because there's just not a good understanding of what FEMA is looking for concerning emergency purchases. You know, typically there's a lot of money, as Kim mentioned, flying out the door during the emergency response period. So you want to be especially diligent in following FEMA's rules so that you're not leaving reimbursement money lying on the table for things that would otherwise be eligible. FEMA does allow an exception to normal competitive procurement practices under emergency or exigent circumstances. However, and this is a big however, there are still some steps that FEMA expects the applicant to take to align these purchases with other federal requirements. So another resource that we're going to direct you to in your helpful links document, as I mentioned, is the FEMA fact sheet for procurement under emergency and exigent circumstances. And this fact sheet gives you a lot of detail concerning utilizing FEMA's emergency or exigent exception. But let me just mention 3 of the most common things that applicants miss when it comes to these emergency purchases. So when you're awarding a non-competitive or a sole source type purchase utilizing the emergency or exigent exception that you're allowed by FEMA, FEMA is going to expect you to do several things, and I want to hit on the 3 biggest ones. First of all, you're going to need to, for every one of these purchases that you're making where you're using this exception, you're going to need to provide a written justification explaining the circumstances that require the use of the emergency or exigent exception. I mean, sometimes that seems like sort of a duh, you know, moment, because I mean, we're in an emergency. There's a lot of things that have to happen very quickly. But FEMA wants to understand, and anyone else in the review period, whether it's FEMA or the State Department agency auditors or way down the road OIG, they want to understand why you needed to use that exigent or emergency exception. And elements of the things that you should include in the narrative are noted in the last page of that fact sheet that I mentioned, but at a very high level, you need to explain why a delay to utilize normal competitive procurement methods in the specific instance would have caused unnecessary harm either to physical property, public health and safety, etc. So we want to have that written justification. We also want to be sure that we're including all of the applicable federal and FEMA recommended clauses in your purchase orders, your contracts, or your agreements for that sole source or non-competitive purchase. And again, remember, you may be utilizing a lot of pre-awarded contracts that you never thought federal dollars would touch, but now that you're asking for FEMA funding, the federal dollars are touching those contracts. So you not only want to think about what could I do to take care of ahead of time some of the major contracts that I might need to have in place to respond effectively, but also do I have a quick and easy way to amend contracts that I'm going to need to call upon? Because, you know, it's hard to potentially think about everything that you might need to access. And then that third thing is the completion of a cost or price analysis for anything over the simplified acquisition threshold. So we'll dive in a little bit more on the cost or price analysis here a little bit later, but just know that that's one of those things. So written justification, inclusion of the applicable federal and FEMA recommended contract clauses, and then making sure you're doing a cost or price analysis for anything at a minimum over the simplified acquisition threshold. But one thing I really want to emphasize is you need to be sure to begin immediate plans to transition to a normal competitive practice once the emergency or exigent circumstance has ended. And I just want to kind of interject here something about, this COVID-19 scenario we're in. So normally, in the normal, if you want to call it a normal FEMA event, I mean, we're usually dealing with weather-related disasters or earthquakes, those kinds of things. There's a very defined emergency period for those types of events. But with COVID-19, the emergency period began in January. It's continuing on today, and it will continue on until Health and Human Services determines that the public health emergency has ended. Well, relying heavily on non-competitive procurement in February or March, or maybe on into April for COVID-19 is one thing. But continuing to rely heavily on that exception for May and moving forward probably isn't the best strategy. Even though it's allowed, it may not be the best strategy. And don't get me wrong, there still may be items that are very scarce, PPE type items, other types of equipment or supplies or cleaning agents that are needed that you can only get from a single source or limited sources. But there are many items now that, the initial, kind of getting into this mode of responding to this disaster, there may be things now that can be transitioned to normal competitive practices, and FEMA is going to start to look for that to happen. All right, I spent quite a bit of time there. Let's move on to another topic. Full and open competition. This is pretty standard stuff for public procurement professionals. You do this on a daily basis, but just continue to be diligent in this area during disaster recovery, because the reliance is going to be on federal funding. You're going to want to be sure that when you're able to resume those competitive practices, that you're going to want to be sure that you cast a very wide net to provide opportunities for suppliers and contractors to compete. So not only casting a very wide net is important from FEMA's viewpoint, but also you want to make sure that you're not doing anything to restrict full and open competition. Don't have overly restrictive requirements for experience, let's say, when a lot of experience isn't necessarily needed for the specific job. Don't have excessive bonding requirements. Don't develop, specifications in such a way that as to restrict competition, or for the optic of that to be that maybe a vendor specifically, helped you develop those specifications. We want to make sure that we're, as much as possible, creating full and open competition wherever we can. And that leads us into was sort of a subset of full of open competition, and that are the 6 affirmative steps for inclusion of small minority-owned women business enterprises and labor area surplus firms. FEMA emphasizes good faith efforts to take these affirmative steps to include these types of firms in your FEMA procurement projects and your procurement activities. Now, keep in mind, from a federal standpoint, this is not a set-aside requirement, but you will need to document the good faith efforts that you make in this area. But let me also say, this is an area that is very difficult requirement to meet after the fact. There's some things we can do to better align with FEMA after the fact, like maybe going back and amending terms and conditions, those kinds of things. But if you don't engage in these good faith efforts prior to awarding your purchase, you'll have a really hard time convincing FEMA that you did everything you could to be inclusive of these types of firms. So let's just quickly go through what these 6 affirmative steps are and what they mean to you. We want to be sure that we include these types of firms on our solicitation list. So many of you, when you're capturing vendor information or vendor registration, you may be asking the question, are you a certified small minority-owned women business enterprise type firm? So make sure you're including these types of firms and know who those firms are when you're updating your vendor files. You want to ensure that these firms, when they are a probable source for goods or services being sought, that you're soliciting them and making good faith efforts to do some outreach to make them aware of these federal projects that will be coming up for their participation. To the extent possible, and if it's reasonable for your project, you want to, within that solicitation, divide your scope requirements so that a smaller, diverse firm could potentially bid on a portion of that scope. Maybe you're not going, maybe you have the ability for this project to allow multiple, contractors to be awarded portions of the scope. That may not always make sense, but you need to at least think that through and know that you have can explain to FEMA if they should question that why it didn't make sense in that particular for that particular project. We want to establish flexible delivery schedules for either goods that we're trying to procure or for scope deliverables when possible. And then FEMA also wants to see that we are actively using the resources of the Small Business Administration, Minority Business Development Agency, U.S. Department of Commerce, those kinds of agencies that can help you conduct outreach to these types of firms concerning your procurement activities. Some of these firms, more at the local or state level, may allow you to post your notice for your solicitations that are coming up. And then finally, if you are going to award prime contractors for any of your projects, you're going to need to require that those prime contractors take the first 5 affirmative steps for any subcontracting activity that they're going to engage in for your FEMA project. All right, let's talk a little bit more about cost or price analysis. I mentioned this one earlier on. Because the FEMA PA grant is a federal grant, fair and reasonable pricing is huge to them. These are federal dollars, again, casting a very wide net, and we need to also make sure that we're getting fair and reasonable pricing. A formal cost or price analysis is required for anything above the simplified acquisition threshold. And, FEMA doesn't prescribe a specific form or format. However, there is a document that FEMA has that gives us a little bit of a window into what they're looking for. That's the FEMA pricing guide. And again, we'll have a link for that to you in your resources. But essentially, if you work through that pricing guide, you'll see that the foundation of the cost or price analysis is an independent estimate prior to receiving bids or proposals. And really, that's just a fancy way of saying your market research. What is a reasonable range of prices that I would expect to receive based on recent historical cost or published catalog pricing, et cetera. And, you all that work in public procurement on a daily basis, you do this all the time, but you probably do a lot of it in your head. You're not documenting what you're doing, and the documentation of that is really key. And then I'll also say that if you do a really thorough job on the independent estimate, on the front end, chances are you'll have most of the documentation you'll need to support the cost or price analysis that you do after your bids and responses come in. So essentially, you do your independent estimate, then you go through your competitive process, you receive your responses in, you tabulate or evaluate those depending on what type of solicitation you're doing, and then take a look back at the independent estimate. And if the market during your competitive process rendered something, prices that were far above what you thought you would have seen in a normal market, doesn't mean you have to throw that out. It just means that you're going to need to do a little bit more work to explain to FEMA why you're going to accept those prices that were rendered, to justify that the costs were fair and reasonable in that particular market condition that you were in. Again, thinking about COVID-19. Right now, it's hard to imagine that we're anytime soon going to forget about what some of these price increases that we're seeing. I mean, sometimes markup of over 1,000% on some types of items. But believe it or not, we'll get away, from this event, and it'll be years down the road when somebody else is reviewing this. And so we want to make sure that we've got the documentation and the justification to support that those prices were fair and reasonable. And I just want to emphasize to you all that you want to be the one to lead FEMA to your cost reasonableness conclusion. If you don't give them enough information to help them understand how you came to the conclusion that fair and reasonable pricing was obtained in light of the existing market conditions, you're going to be relying on someone at the FEMA level or the state agency auditor level to come to their own conclusion based on whatever resources they may have. So it's super important for you to document your organization's procurement story, take the lead in telling your procurement story so that FEMA and those in the process can understand where you're coming from, because you're going to know best about what you were experiencing at that point in time. All right, suspension and debarment. FEMA will not approve reimbursement for contracts awarded to a vendor who has been federally suspended or debarred. Believe it or not, a lot of people still miss this one. And again, I think a lot of it has to do with, where some of this stuff that we're dealing with, we're touching contracts that maybe never before have had a federal funding source. And so, our process may be that we're only checking when we know that there's a federal funding source that's going to be applied. SAM.gov is the most utilized way for checking suspension and debarment. And if you want to, use that as your resource, once you do your search for that vendor before you award that contract, you want to use the option that they have to print to PDF and save that for your procurement file. That's your proof that you did that. And I would say, let's say that you had to make some quick decisions on some sole sourcing or some very, quick, rapid decisions in the early days. Maybe you didn't have the opportunity. Maybe systems were down and you couldn't do a suspension or debarment check prior to issuing, the agreement to move forward with that purchase. Go ahead and do that after the fact. Even though there's a date difference, that's okay. That just demonstrates to FEMA that you understand what the rules are. You're making sure that you haven't already awarded someone, that's been suspended or debarred, and that for future purchases that it's okay to move forward with that vendor if you have future FEMA purchases that you need to make. Another thing that I see a lot of our clients using nowadays, particularly in higher ed or in the healthcare area, there are some third-party services out there, and essentially how those work is they continually run your current vendor data, vendor file through an automated check, on a regularly scheduled basis against multiple state and federal databases. And these processes generally kind of generate an audit report of any of the vendors that have a hit for suspension and debarment. So those type of report results, that audit report, can also be provided to FEMA as proof that you're verifying that you're not awarding to a suspended or debarred vendor. So again, I want to encourage you, as you're thinking through this, think about what your current process for checking this for other federal grants is, and determine if that process is going to cover you in the event of a federally declared disaster, particularly if you're going to be using pre-awarded contracts that may or may not have been procured originally according to federal requirements. So, when we think about disaster and FEMA help, we normally think about things like debris removal, disaster remediation, permanent work type contracts that will need to conform to the federal requirements. But, what if you lose a majority of a building to a flood, a fire, or an earthquake? Think about all the contents that are in that building: replacement furniture, the fixtures, equipment, office supplies. Those things, may or may not be fully covered by your insurance claim. But if they're not, if that insurance money, taps out at a certain dollar level and you've still got, hundreds of thousands of dollars to cover for contents, all of those types of contracts may be touching federal dollars as well. So this is definitely one that you can take a step back right now. We're not in the middle, hopefully right now, of other than COVID-19, of another natural disaster that's going on. This is one you can think about now, make adjustments if you need to prior to a catastrophic event to ensure that you're covered on this one. All right, there are some types of contracts that FEMA simply does not like. And so I will have you pay particular attention to the contracts at the top of this list: cost plus percentage of cost contracts and cost plus percentage of construction cost contracts. If you are a non-state entity, these are strictly prohibited. FEMA will not reimburse you for these types of contracts. If you're a state entity, you are not prohibited technically in the law, but you are strongly discouraged from using these types of contracts. I would just say avoid them at all costs if you can. FEMA doesn't like these types of contracting arrangements because the contractor has no real incentive to keep the overall cost of the contract in check. So again, costs, price reasonableness, they're always checking to make sure that, costs are eligible and that they are reasonable as far as the pricing goes. One thing I'll mention to you is that we also see FEMA and state agency auditors pulling costs associated with cost plus percentage of cost elements out as ineligible, even if the overall contracting method is not by definition a cost plus percentage of cost contract. And so I'll give you an example, a time and materials example. The contracting method is time and materials, but within that time and materials contract, there may be a pricing sheet. There usually is. And there may be a line within that pricing sheet that says, for example, small tools will be charged at 3% of total cost of project. Well, what we see FEMA doing is saying, oh, that's a cost plus percentage of cost element, and we're going to take all the dollars associated with that element. Even though this is a time and materials contract, we're going to pull out those dollars, that dollar amount as ineligible. And in the early days of a disaster, I mean, you can be talking about millions of dollars of funding being deemed ineligible if those get pulled out as a prohibited cost plus percentage of cost contracting mechanism. So I would encourage you, if you know that you sort of have go-to time and materials type contracts that you may need to use, take a look at those pricing sheets. And if you are able to get ahead of it, if there's some elements there that look like cost plus percentage of cost, I would encourage you to try to negotiate with your time and materials contractor ahead of time. Let them know FEMA's not going to go for this type of pricing, and try to figure out if you can convert that to a unit-based price or a fixed price of some sort. There may be a way for them to get to the dollar amount that is going to work for them, but it's just captured in a different way, and that will save you a lot of heartache in trying to defend that piece with FEMA. These other types at the bottom of the list, cost plus incentive fee, cost plus award fee, cost plus fixed fee, those are all okay from FEMA. The reason being that everything after the plus on every one of those, an incentive fee, an award fee, a fixed fee, those are all fixed dollars. They're not something that can arbitrarily be escalated as the project scope or the overall project dollars increase. So that's why they're a little bit more friendly about those. All right, I mentioned time and materials, and there are a couple more things I want to tell you about time and materials contracts. I sort of talked about, you know, time and materials from like a weather-related event. Those would be a lot of those contracts where you've got contractors coming in, mucking out your buildings, getting the water out, you know, making the environment, you know, such that you can get in there to actually figure out what your actual damages are. In the COVID-19 marketplace, we're seeing a lot of time and materials being used for cleaning protocols and sanitization, those kinds of things. FEMA will allow time and materials contracts, but they want you to limit the use of these contracts. It used to be that they would tell you how long you could use them, and then they realized that really wasn't working for people. So now it's on you as an applicant to determine what's a reasonable amount of time that we need, you know, to be using these time and materials contracts. But if you're going to use them, you know, use them for a limited time. If you're going to use them, also FEMA wants to see a written explanation of the conditions that existed whereby no other type of contract was feasible. And there are very good reasons why the only way forward would be with a time and materials contract, particularly when you don't have an idea of what your total damages are in a building, and you've got to get it, you know, mitigated to the point where you can get in there and start assessing what your damages are, those kinds of things. In addition to that explanation, they want to see that you set a ceiling price on the overall contract that the contractor exceeds at their own risk. And then FEMA wants to see that there is documented oversight of that time and materials contractor as they're working and making sure that they're managing the overall cost of the contracts. So you may have your own staff assigned to checking in on these job sites every day to ensure that the work is being carried out as agreed. I would encourage you that there needs to be some sort of documentation of that, maybe through notes that are added to your work order system, et cetera, just so that there's some documentation that this staff member, you know, is going, you know, on these days at these times, and, you know, checking in with the time and materials contractor. You may also decide to hire a third party to oversee this time and materials type work. And if that's the case, I would encourage you that that third party needs to provide you documentation of those hours spent, you know, whether it's maybe they have a ongoing meeting that's held weekly with the time and materials contractor. If there's minutes that can be kept of those meetings, of those regular scheduled meetings, that's a good way to demonstrate to anyone in the FEMA review process that you were doing the very best you could do to control and manage the cost of those time and materials contracts. All right, let's talk a little bit about applicable federal terms and conditions and the FEMA recommended clauses. FEMA's Office of General Counsel has developed a FEMA contract provisions template. And again, this is another link that we'll provide you in our resources document. It's a very lengthy document, and primarily that's because it contains sample language for the majority of the required and recommended clauses. And just keep in mind that this requirement applies in some form or fashion to every purchase you intend to shift to FEMA for reimbursement. Some of the clauses are required for all contracts and POs. Some are triggered by different dollar amounts, et cetera. So again, be mindful that there are terms and conditions that they're going to look for your FEMA purchases, even for those early sole source, non-competitive type procurements that may be going out the door in the early days. And as far as documentation, when it comes to FEMA, I mean, those of you that are purchasing professionals, I mean, we're already flooded with documents day in and day out, everything that we have to keep, whether they're paper or electronic. Usually for a lot of us, it's a combination of both. But you need to document, and then document some more. Your procurement story needs to be documented in such a way that anyone years down the road, and including an OIG auditor, that may come to town and need to audit because you've received X amount of, federal funds. They need to be able to understand the circumstances surrounding that specific purchase, how it met federal requirements, how the costs were determined to be reasonable in the market conditions that existed at the time of the purchase, et cetera. And then sort of another thing to be aware of is the record keeping aspect of all this documentation. FEMA requires you as an applicant to keep all your records related to the FEMA funding projects, including procurement records for 3 years after the final project worksheet for your entity. You need to keep them for 3 years after that final project worksheet for your entity has been closed. And just for some perspective, we're still closing out Ike, as Kim mentioned. So for some of these agencies in Texas that received money for Hurricane Ike, the 3-year clock hasn't even started on the additional amount of time. Ike happened in 2008. We're on the 12-year anniversary of that. So if some of these agencies get their final project worksheet for their event closed out, this year, they're looking at 3 more years in addition. That's going to be basically a total of 15 years that they've had to keep these documents, and that is probably far out exceeds what you would have for your normal record retention policies. So just be aware that everyone involved in record retention, whether it's your the people that are setting up the controls for your document management system or your warehouse, if they're the ones that are taking care of document destruction, everybody needs to be on the same page that anything related to our FEMA projects we need to keep for a very, very long time, keep them separate from the other documents so that you don't run into issues. You don't want the OIG auditor coming in years down the road questioning something and then having to tell them, oh, sorry, we don't have those records anymore. If they've got a question and you can't prove it up and they can't have their question answered, they're going to make a recommendation to FEMA to deobligate funds because of that reason. And that is a terrible reason for you to have funds taken back from you years after the fact. So with that said, Kim, I'm going to throw it back to you, and we're going to talk, I know you're going to talk a little bit about the role of cooperative purchasing in disaster recovery.
Thanks, Shelly. So one of the big questions that we get normally when we give this presentation is, yeah, that's great, but can we use a cooperative agreement when we're working with FEMA funding? And the short answer is yes. So although there are some state agencies out there that don't prefer that you use a cooperative agreement, and we'll go through why, per the uniform rules, you can in fact use a cooperative agreement. So I'm going to read this piece because I think it's important. To foster greater economy and efficiency, they encourage a non-federal entity to enter into state and local intergovernmental agreements for procurement or use of common or shared goods and services. So there it is right there in black and white. Yes, in fact, you can use a cooperative agreement. However, I will say that not all cooperatives are created equal. So there are some cooperatives out there that have not taken a good look at FEMA's rules and requirements. I'll say Choice Partners has done a lot of work in reviewing their processes and procedures. When it comes to FEMA's rules and requirements, there's a checklist that shows you how their contracts line up with those rules, where they can provide you with the information that you need to support your procurement file, and where there are certain steps such as suspension and debarment that you'll have to take on your own. There are other cooperatives out there, like I said, that don't have that same information. You know, it might be that they have gone through those steps and that information is available, but the onus is on you and your agency to make sure that the cooperative agreements that you are in fact using do hold up to FEMA's rules and requirements for procurement. So with that, you can't also take a cooperative agreement right off the shelf and what we call plug and play. And this is, again, another great use of your blue sky days, is if you have go-to cooperatives that you're using, we recommend that you take the time to evaluate those cooperatives, their processes, procedures, their paperwork against FEMA's rules and requirements that can be found on PDOT's website, and there's a link to that in the helpful links document. But sit down and do an analysis of how your go-to cooperatives stand up to those rules and requirements, so that you're not caught post-disaster utilizing existing cooperative agreements that might not line up well. Another good use of cooperative agreements is when you are sitting and evaluating just your disaster response in general. It's good to get some agreements in place ahead of a disaster event. So, right, for those that are listening that are in the Gulf Coast states, we're in hurricane season. So do you have your restoration agreements in place? You know, roofing, HVAC, all those things that you're going to need to kind of put things back together. Debris removal, do you have those contracts in place now? And if you don't, can you utilize cooperative agreements to help put something in place so that you're protected and your agency is protected should something happen tomorrow? So let's go to the next slide here. In talking through evaluating cooperative agreements, I want to point you to two different documents that are out there on FEMA's website that can help walk you through evaluating your cooperative and understanding how FEMA views cooperatives. So there's a January 2018 fact sheet, and then there's a September 2018 fact sheet. The September 2018 fact sheet came out to correct for a statement included in the January fact sheet that was inaccurate, and that statement was that you could not use an out-of-state cooperative. That, in fact, is not the case, and so that September 2018 fact sheet came out to correct for that. However, the January 2018 fact sheet has some great information after that first page that shows you what FEMA would be looking for in terms of documentation and support and justification for your reasoning as to why you want to use that cooperative agreement. So in our minds, those two fact sheets are very good resources, minus that misstatement on the January one. So when you're moving forward with cooperative agreements, like we said, they're not plug and play, so proceed with caution. Really evaluate the cooperatives and make sure that the ones that you're using actually do meet FEMA's requirements in all the areas that they can, and then understand where you need to come in and supplement those steps in that documentation from your side. Also, request, and I think most of you normally do this in your general course of business anyway, but request all of that backup documentation that the cooperative has for the contracts that they have, and keep that on your side. Don't rely on the cooperative to hold that documentation for you, because as Shelly mentioned, sometimes that audit window extends way out, and so the chances that that documentation would reside with the cooperative at that point were pretty slim. and then explaining your compliance or the compliance of the cooperative with FEMA's requirements. So utilizing that checklist to walk FEMA through, as Shelly mentioned, you guide them, don't allow them to evaluate, right? Walk them through exactly how everything lines up and how you're checking all the boxes, in addition to providing that justification for why you've in fact chosen to go with a cooperative agreement. So with that, I will turn it over to Christy. Christy, you're on mute, I think.
Oh, thank you so
There you
much. I'm Christy Nichols, the contract manager with Choice Partners, and I'm going to go over some of the Choice Partner contracts and how they are FEMA friendly. Prior to soliciting a bid, Choice Partners conducts an independent estimate that we submit along with our documentation requesting of why we are wanting to go out for this RFP. We work on creating the RFP, not only specific for our needs that Harris County Department of Ed may have, but also what needs that we have been hearing back from our members nationally. We seek out competitive bids and proposals in a manner which will ensure full, open, and fair competition. And we do not utilize, prohibit geographical preferences. Since we are a national cooperative, we want to make sure to encompass all of our areas for our government entities that want to utilize the contracts. We issue our solicitation in our local newspaper, which is the Houston Chronicle, online and in paper form. And we also advertise it on our eBid system with HCDE, a minimum of 2 weeks prior to the bid closing date. We do offer several weeks that we have it open. Sometimes they'll be open for 4 weeks. It just depends on the type of responses that we're looking to get in, how large the RFP is and what it entails. And we do leave it open for general questions that you can submit to the RFP so that way that we can answer those and everyone can see who's on the same page. As Shelly mentioned earlier about the 6 affirmative steps, we do take affirmative steps to encourage participation by small, minority, and women-owned businesses. And we also link, whenever you're looking at our awarded vendor contract list, we'll have those identified by a little asterisk. So if your district requires that you use a certain percentage of vendors that are underutilized, that's just a quick reference for you to be able to see that in a paper form. We also have that information available on that vendor's landing page. Once all of that is done, we have a bid tabulation that was created from the bidder's response to the RFP line items that were in on the eBid solicitation. Okay, we do a cost price analysis is performed as applicable prior to awarding the contract to any of the vendors. Then we select an evaluation committee, and what they do is they evaluate the responses that are based off the weighted criteria from the RFP. We have certain criteria for price, for their quality of service, you know, from references that we've received from, sometimes they'll contact the purchasing departments or the maintenance departments at the entities, and we use all of that to weight them on their performance. After all the weights are calculated, an evaluation summary is compiled, and that goes in with the documentations that are available for you, the member, to be able to view. We incorporate all applicable contracts provisions into the award, and we've obtained required certifications from all the vendors. Choice Partners has an employee that's dedicated to verifying that all the required documents and certifications on every awarded contract is completed. And what she does is she goes through and makes sure that every dot or I is dotted and T is crossed before we submit it to our board for an award. Then we take those recommendations based off the evaluation summary to the Harris County Department of Ed Board of Trustees for approval. Now, after the approval, the board approves that, we do issue an award letter to the awarded vendors, letting them know, you were selected and awarded on this contract. Now, since the COVID-19, we've incorporated the FEMA required contract clauses to our contracts. So this will go in with what Shelly was talking about, making sure that all of your contracts that you get with cooperatives are FEMA covered, and ours are. And all these documents are available on the vendor's landing page at the Choice Partners website in a zip file called Due Diligence. Everything that your auditors are going to need in order for you to go through and audit with them, whether it's a soft audit or hard audit, is available on the vendor's landing page, like I said, under the due diligence. If there is more documentation that's requested or required by your auditors, feel free to reach out to the contract manager that's listed on that vendor's landing page, and they'll be able to assist you with the documents that you're needing to get covered for your auditor's purposes. As an entity, you should consult with your legal counsel to ensure whether these documentations that we're able to provide will be sufficient for the given type of purchase or the contract or the type of service that you're needing for your entity. We have quality awarded vendors that will be there for your entity during and after a disaster to assist with construction, debris removal, disaster mitigation, consulting, but this does not include engineering consultant, furniture for the classroom, office, cafeteria, and etc., industrial equipment, M&O parts and equipment, modular buildings, fuel, and lubricants. Oh, there it is. Sorry, I'm trying to move the slide forward. It's not wanting to cooperate. There it goes. Okay. Choice Partners has awarded JOC IDIQ vendors that provide painting, drywall, ceiling, and flooring. They also provide power and cooling solutions, roofing, safety supplies, and safety equipment, as well as two-way radios. We have a certain page that's on our website under About Us that's called COVID-19, and on there are specific vendors that have contacted us telling us, this may not be a typical product that we provide under our contract, but due to the disaster that's happening, that they will provide those products now. So that's a quick way for you to be able to go and look at those. Please visit the Choice Partners website to view all the contracts that are specific to your needs. I think I've finished up a little early. I am gonna go ahead and turn it over to Choice Partners Director, Jeff Drury.
Jeff, you're on.
All right. This is always a fun part, this transition on these presentations, but hopefully it kind of keeps things a little fresher and you get a little bit of different perspectives, different deliveries, and different information from various entities. I'm really just going to talk really 2 slides. And the first slide, I'll talk a little bit about our contact information. The second slide, I'll do a little bit more of a wrap up and kind of review some of the things that were said, some of the things that I remember writing down and pointing out that maybe you want to just really reconfirm. If we have a little bit of time, one of the things that we were just thinking about is there may be a way to look at the website and just kind of go take a glance at due diligence, because that's some of the information that has been, apologize for that, battery's running a little. It's some of the information that you're always going to need to provide to FEMA and to help supply them documentation to make you compliant and get your funding back. So the first slide is really, these are the folks that spoke. Well, there's actually a few background people I was going to recognize separately, and I'll do that while we're doing this. As you see, you've got my information and Christy's information from Choice Partners. And you've also got Kim and Shelly's information from DRS. They're one of our awarded vendors, obviously, and do a tremendous job. But also in the background, we've had a couple of people that are very instrumental, extremely knowledgeable on the Choice Partner side, in addition to a few folks from client engagement also. On the Choice Partner side, Joanne Nichols has been kind of helping develop this and working a lot in the background. She's our assistant director. She handles all of our contracts that don't have the word food in them, not food related, not nutrition. We've got a separate assistant director, Tricia Jensen, on that. But Joanne has been around a long time in Choice. If you call the 1-800 number, there's a high likelihood you will talk to Joanne. There's a high likelihood if it's between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m., she will give you an answer immediately, whether she's sitting in front of a computer, whether she's out riding her horse, or whatever. Extremely knowledgeable. She can go through a lot of these things blind as far as helping any of you folks out across the country with questions or just issues or wanting documentation if you're being audited, whatever. You just want to find a vendor. The other one is Stephen Kendrick, Senior Manager, Facility Planning. He's got experience working on the school district side, also spent a lot of time in construction, licensed electrician in the past, just very knowledgeable about all of the aspects of not only what a government entity wants, having worn that hat and those shoes, but also very knowledgeable on what Choice Partners does, what we want to do, the legal aspects, what you can and can't do. He does a whole separate, a lot of different and separate training on how to use a unit price book, how to work with JOC, how to talk about, what's construction, what's maintenance, what can be used, what can't be used. So a couple of very instrumental and knowledgeable people in the background for Choice Partners also. As we mentioned, Kim and Shelly, there's a couple of folks on our client engagement. You heard the voice at the very beginning. That's Stephanie De Los Santos. She's the director of client engagement. She did the intro and that was her voice coming on saying, "You have 5 minutes." It's like, like you're getting ready for fire drill or whatever. But she's done a tremendous job organizing a lot of what we're doing here also. And in addition, helping out with a lot of the organization, with a lot of the content, with a lot of working on the webinar itself is Janet Walks. She is the assistant director on in the client engagement area, and client engagement is basically another name for marketing. They do a lot of the marketing supporting us and supporting other divisions. And so they're very instrumental in helping us help vendors market to members and helping us add members all the time and answer members' questions about what we can do for them. So with that, I'm going to go to the next slide. I'm going to try and recap a couple of things, and then we'll go. We have a few minutes left. We will actually go to the Choice Partners website, and just it's something that came up a couple of times, as people may or may not know. We talk about due diligence. About some of the supporting documentation. Yes, you can call us and we can send it to you, but I think a lot of people, especially in procurement and in purchasing, they want to be able to put their hands on it, feel it, touch it, go get it themselves, put it in their own little file and do what they need to do with it as far as storing it and knowing that that we're legal and compliant as far as our contracts, and we will help them, number one, stay out of trouble with FEMA and with audits, and number two, help them get as much money back as they possibly could as far as FEMA reimbursements also. One of the things we didn't discuss, and I'll just go a real quick afterthought, kind of the first bullet there, FEMA, OIG, all those guys, they are all incentivized to de-obligate funds. That's the real nice way of say, take the money back that they gave to you the first time, but maybe they just brushed over with a very fine brush and didn't do a deep dive. So they're all very incentivized, believe it or not, but regardless of what side of the party you sit on, there are a few smart people up there in Washington, and they give away the money, but somewhere down the way, they're going to say, did we really do the right thing or did we not? And I think that's one of the things they do with the de-obligation, whether it's the OIG, whether it's the FEMA person or whatever the different levels. I'll put a little feather in DRS's hat also. One of the things that they are very good at is when you go in and you start talking to FEMA, you know, who do you talk to if FEMA says no? Who can you talk to next to possibly get a yes as far as what you're doing or whatever? They're very good. They live that world. They're very good at migrating, navigating, understanding how you deal with federal government. I mean, or how you deal with FEMA and how you deal with a lot of those entities, because there are a lot of times where school districts or some of the people that cities, counties, they get a no and that's the end of it. Well, a lot of times DRS has been able to go back and say, well, they told you no, but that's not really a no. You need to go here. They're very, very good about helping you get the most out of what you deserve. One of the things I'll say as Kim kept saying, oh, Choice Partners is doing, they've done a good job and they've done a lot of work understanding the FEMA compliance and all that. I wish she was more of a salesperson for us and just say, yeah, Choice Partners is great. But no, that I think that's good that she actually did what she said. Some of the proof is in the pudding. One of the recent giant things that we had down here on the Gulf Coast was Hurricane Harvey. I see they're trying to shut me up here real quick. Janet, we'll get to there in a second. Hold on just a second. But one of the things that we recently had was Hurricane Harvey. To our knowledge, we have not seen any project, anything involving Choice Partners have any de-obligation or any negative effect on funds. There are a lot of entities that did their own thing that didn't get the funds. There are a lot of entities that used other cooperatives that didn't get funds also, and we know specifics of some, and we're talking millions of dollars, you know, 4 million plus, when they think they're getting that money back from FEMA and you don't get it, and it's because someone didn't do their due diligence and you kind of thought they would. And like Kim was saying, if you have a go-to cooperative, whether it's us or someone else, do your work up front. And I'm going to keep stealing Kim's phrase, on these blue sky days, do your work. Even if it's not Choice Partners, go to your co-op and make sure that they're doing all these things right. The FEMA checklist, they're doing the 6 affirmative steps. You need to protect yourself. That's one of the things that you've got to be very diligent and very persistent about. And it's a lot easier to do it now than as I think Shelly might have said, you know, your building's 4 feet underwater and you can't get access to your computers and you haven't prepared, you're not necessarily set up as well as you should to work remotely. So do a lot of that work right now. That's one of those things that I think is very, very good for you. I'm just kind of going through some of the notes. It's and again, just reiterate, it's very tough to comply after the fact. It's very tough to kind of create documents that weren't there from the beginning after an event has happened. So I guess with that being said, I'm going to turn it over. I want to say thanks again for everyone that stayed, that listened, and hopefully I think there are a number of nice takeaways. I think there's a lot of great information on there. Some of it may be review, some of it may have reinforced what you already thought, and hopefully a lot of it was new information that you can go and apply and help your entity out. And yeah, we'd love you to use Choice Partners, but just do your homework, do your due diligence, and make sure that either you have these things in place internally, that if for some reason, I can't imagine why, but if for some reason your co-op of Choice is not choice partners, just put them under the gun, put them under the microscope, put them to the test. But again, we'd love you to have choice partners as your go-to cooperative. I'm going to let our other folks speak. I think there's somebody chomping at the bit here. So is it Janet coming on? Stephanie? Janet?
Yeah, well, I wanted to just give a reminder to those who are on right now, but just want to make sure you stay on, because at the end is where you will have the opportunity for your CEU credit. So you would need to stay on until after Janet goes and shows you some really useful tools on our website. She's going to go through a few things that will be helpful to you. So before you log off, just remember that there will be an opportunity for you to receive CEU credit, and and we'll provide that to you at the very end. So Janet, with that said, you are on.
Okay. Janet, you coming?
Also, if you have questions, this is Stephanie again, be sure to submit any questions that you may have. We do have people fielding the questions. Now is a great opportunity to do that as we get Janet on the line. Can you hear us, Janet? Janet is our Assistant Director for Client Engagement.
On my picture
Yeah.
got smaller. There she is. Okay, it's all yours, Janet. I'm not. Wait, I think you're muted, Janet, still.
We do apologize for the delay. As we wait for Janet to come on with her sound, she is unmuted on this end, so we're just going to double check. But what we can do right now is, let me just let you know that there are 2 handouts that are available for you to download. One of them is a helpful links doc from DRS that's there. So don't, be sure to download that. You should be able to see that on your end. It is from DRS. Thank you, Kim and Shelly, for the excellent presentation that you provided to us. We also have a FEMA checklist from Choice Partners, which will be helpful for you. So I want to make sure that you go ahead and do that. Stephen, do you want to go online and since we can't hear Janet at the moment, maybe she can jump on in a second. But Stephen or Joanne, maybe you can jump on and show the different functions on the website to our participants, unless Janet is on right now. Again, just there, we can see her, we just can't hear her. I don't know what's going on there. Yeah, we'll just go ahead and see if Joanne or Stephen can jump on, or even Jeff, if you want to maneuver through the website.
I'm going to let Joanne. She's probably the best. And unless Janet, do you know sign language?
Okay, we'll get Joanne. I'm going to hand over the mouse rights to Joanne right now. Sorry for the technical difficulty, but Joanne should have access right now. This is Joanne Nichols. She's the Assistant Director for Choice Partners. Thank you for your patience. For those who are participating, we do appreciate you working through this with us. So Joanne, it's all yours.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Thumbs
Yeah.
up, yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so a few things that they were talking about the website. I just kind of want to show you exactly where they are so that you can help them. I don't know, but most of you probably will recognize my voice, because if you've called the 800 number, then you've probably talked to me. Well, except since May the 21st, when our phones just decided that they had COVID and can no longer speak to me. So I try to call you back, but if you don't get me, I've put my personal cell on the website so that you can then, instead of using this 1-800 number, you would be able to get me under the About Us and Contact Us and come down here. I've put it right here. So if you don't get an answer on that 1-800 number, please call me there because our phones do had COVID. I did get 3 phone calls this morning, but since then I have had 2 that did not come through. So with that being said, we also under About Us have COVID-19 right here. And this is where we would like for you to go to see the vendors that can possibly help you. We are trying to update this on a daily basis so that you can go through here and see exactly what vendors can help you with what you need. Now, a lot of your plexiglass items that you need are coming through the restaurant supplies. Now, don't get me wrong, we have a lot of facility service vendors that can also do it, and product services and supplies. Just depending on what size of the restaurant supplies, what size of the plexiglass, whether you want stationary, whether you want temporary, whether you want hanging, whether you want manufactured. You can all get some of that from these vendors that are listed here on this page. As you go through there, you'll be able to click on the vendor themselves. And if you click on the vendor themselves, what I've done is like, we'll take ISI Restaurant Supply, for example. What they can do is once you come over here, you'll be able to see their COVID-19 and what exactly they have to offer you. So I know it's a couple of too many clicks, but at least we have it where you can immediately find some information about what they may or may not have available to you. You can easily get to all of these vendors in one fell swoop. If you come back up here, how do I go backwards? Okay, it didn't put me into a new window, so I'm having a little bit of difficulty going back to the website. So if wow, sorry about that. Let's see if we can get back there. Oh man, I was going good too.
Hey, Joanne, let me see if I can get you on. I'm gonna try
Okay.
that one more time and let's see if it works here on this end.
It didn't open it into a new window. There we go. Okay, that helps me.
Oh, yes. All right, so I
Okay.
got you back on.
Perfect. Okay, so the other thing we were wanting to show you is how to get to your due diligence. Each one of you should go into the member login. Once you're at the member login, if you can put in your username and password. If you do not have a username and password, simply go in to set up a new account. Once you set up your new account, the entity name should self-populate. You'll click on the entity name and continue. Once you get with your login here, you will be able to see the due diligence from each one of our vendors. You can also get to your get a quote button, and you can also be able to easily check on which vendors have what information that you may need. So whenever you click into current vendors, did it freeze on me?
You got it.
There we go. So once you get into here under available contracts, remember you're on the members dashboard because you have logged in. Then you can go to any one of these vendors that you want to go to, thumb up just a little bit, and down at the very bottom, you'll see this little word that says due diligence, download here. So when you download that, all those documents that Shelly and Kim were speaking about are sitting right there and available for you to be able to download and give to your purchasing departments. Now, this may be the purchasing department that does do this final step, which is fine with us, I'm not going to click on it because I'm afraid I'll get out of this window and be lost forever again. But you can click on that, and that's going to have the advertisement, the total need for the RFP document itself, the bid tab, the whole 9 yards, the award letter, the conflict of interest. It's going to have everything that you need for your purchasing documents. Now, the other thing that you need to know right here is it's going to give you the contact information for you as to who to contact about this contract with Choice Partners. Okay, that's a very important step there too. It's also an easy thing for you to get a quote from all these people simply by going back to your dashboard. You can click it over here too if you want. But when you go to your dashboard, we have a little button that says get a quote. This get a quote is to make your life easy. What we have tried to do, and the only part I don't like about this, is you really have to know the title of your contract. So just for instance, we used ISI as one of the food and small wares. So if we either hit the F or we thumb down to get to food, then we bring up all the F's and we can come to food, food equipment, food service, food and small wares, which is what this is under. And it's also the food equipment parts repair service there. So what we can do is immediately with those two contracts listed, it brings up 9 total vendors. So these 9 vendors, if we do a select all, we can pick every one of them. If we want to take one of them out, we click or highlight that one that we really don't want. And we can kind of pick and choose who we want our quote to go to, so that here we type in the information that we need. And what this is going to do is go directly to these vendors that you have selected in the window above. Once you select your vendors, once you tell them the information that you would like for them to know, you fill out the rest of the information with your information, your email, where you're from, what your organization type is, and your phone number. Then let them know when the product is needed, not when you want this quote back, but when the product is needed. This also has a little spot for attached file. If you can attach a file here that already has your scope and your spec predetermined, then you just attach it here. Notice that there is a 10 meg maximum on that file, but it takes most any kind. It'll take a PDF, an Excel, a Word, whatever one you want, but it's only one file that it will take at that time. And then once you hit submit now, that automatically is emailed to all of your vendors that you have asked for a quote from. What will happen is within the next 48 hours, you should be emailed back to let you know they have questions, they're getting back to you with an answer, or they need more information. So once you hit submit now, it goes to the vendor and it goes directly to them. I get an email letting me know that you have requested a quote. You get an email that lets you know you have requested a quote from quote unquote in Shelly and Kim's place, more than 3 if you're doing for FEMA. So, and in this case, we're doing for 7. So that would be our documentation that proves that we are asking for more than 1 quote for this vendor. Once we get that documentation back, we keep that. Don't lose it, because that's your determination that you are absolutely trying to get more than 1 quote. Then each one of these people should answer you back. If they don't, you can definitely let me know and I'll see what I can do to kind of speed them up a little bit. But then once you get your answer, then that's your little quote pile to go with your FEMA documents, okay? And then you should be good to go with that section. Let me look and see if we have any questions that we might can ask or have out here.
And if we don't have any, Joanne, we're going to go ahead and get Stephen to post the survey in the chat box right now to give the participants a few minutes just to answer a brief survey, which includes a little portion on there of whether or not you need CEU credit. You can actually fill that out at the bottom and provide your email address so that it helps us know who is asking for CEU credits. So once Stephen has that posted in the chat area, be sure to look for it, click on it. As Joanne continues, she might have some more, or if Janet is able to get on, she may have some additional input. But at this moment, we're gonna go ahead and provide that link to you for your CEU credit. And I'm gonna just, Joanne can continue moving forward and see if there's any questions or anything that needs to be answered at this moment.
Okay, if everybody will kind of open up their chat, you'll be able to see that link there for the survey. It's very important that you do that survey because that's the only way you're going to be able to get the availability of these CEU credits. I don't know for you necessarily whether they're important, but I do know for the school districts that their TASBO members need to have that link. So if you have any other questions, I would suggest putting them into the chat box now. Otherwise, I wish I could go through the whole website with you because we have so much available information here for you. If you can't find a vendor and for some reason it's expired on you, always look in the expired contracts and you'll be able to get the vendor's due diligence there. If you can't find it there, just let us know and we will certainly let you know or send you the documents that you need for FEMA. We know they're a little bit slow and tardy and late all the time, so that's why we kind of keep them in reserve. Once they do expire off the website, they do go into expired status and you'll be able to find them under expired status. We also have current RFPs out there for any vendors that may be out there. Maybe you're doing emergency feeding. Emergency feeding is for the food department. Of course, that's not my specialty, but you can still do the RFP for that one. It also has a little bit of PPEs included in it. It's a line item estimate only, so I believe you have to do the whole thing. If you are in need of anything else, you can certainly call and ask. Remember, don't trust that 1-800 number if you call and you can't hear me because our phones have COVID. But other than that, that phone number right there is available to you. And with that, Stephanie, can I pass it over to you or Janet?
Yes, I did ask Janet to see if she can get back on. We may not hear from her, but that's okay. I just do want to remind everybody that the handouts are available for you to download. We will also have the PowerPoint available for you on the website. Maybe Joanne, can you show them where they can find that whenever?
Sure. Okay. Under this About Us, we're going to have a little presentation page right here. Under this presentation page, it'll show up here at the very top, and you'll be able to quote unquote download there, or you'll be able to go into it and look at it, where it just kind of gives the information to it, and what it'll do is give you the YouTube channel underneath. So it's good information. Hopefully you'll be able to do it. You can also download the presentation, the PowerPoint there, and I guess we're also going to put those 2 handouts there also with the PowerPoint, but I believe Stephanie said she's going to email those out to you, but they're also available right there. All you have to do is click that little button, download it, and you can save it to your desktop, and you won't have to worry about clicking on an email that Lord knows may have COVID too. So
And
with that,
remember, we're here to serve you, and we are available. CP staff is available to answer any questions that you have. Feel free to send emails, make the phone call if you need to, but it's all about serving you. And we do appreciate your time here today. We're glad that you participated. fill out that survey, give us some feedback. It only takes about 2 minutes. It's a very quick survey. And if you want that CEU credit, we're going to send it right over to you. So be sure to provide us your email, and remember to make the right choice. Choice Partners, we're definitely here for you. The right resources right now. Thank you for your time. Thank you for participating. We hope to hear from you, and we hope this was an impactful presentation for you. Have a wonderful day, and we will see you next time.